the Team Performance Podcast with Spencer Horn and Christian Napier. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Team Performance Winning Ways for Uncertain Times podcast. I'm Christian Napier, and I am joined today by the man in purple with a purple background. It's Purple Day here in the USA, Spencer Horn. Spencer, how are you?
Great, thank you, and great to be with you, Christian. And I also now have purple drapes.
Wow. Well, yours totally color coordinated. Spencer, how was your weekend?
It was good. My wife and I got to spend time alone. We usually have the kids, grandkids, somebody there. So we were able to just enjoy some time and relax and go out to dinner, just read together, watch movies, all kinds of fun stuff. And now she's in Dallas with watching our grandkids again.
Ah, so she went down there. I assume she flew.
She did. Yeah, she flew, and our kids are looking at some changes to their family, and so she's there watching them while they're out doing some reconnaissance. What about you? What was your weekend like?
Well, I flew down to Southern California. So that was my first experience on a plane since the COVID pandemic. So that was interesting. And I just visited family there Friday and got back last night. So I was gone for just a few days.
Well, so interesting. Come on. Details here. Come on.
Well, details is it's wicked hot everywhere. It's hot
Right
here. It's really hot there. The family I was visiting is around Victorville, so it was like 107, 108 degrees.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, very, very, very toasty. And I heard that we hit 130 degrees in Death Valley over the weekend.
That's right, and that could be a world record.
Could potentially, may even be broken today. Could potentially get broken today. We'll see.
So when it gets that hot, birds literally drop out of the sky dead.
Well, I hope I never see that in person.
That is really, really hot.
I just want to move that from my brain. I don't want to see that image anymore. Well, right. Spencer, I'm super excited to have you introduce our guest today because we've already spoken with him once before to prepare for this podcast, and I'm really, really excited to have a conversation with him. So why don't you go ahead and introduce him?
Absolutely. Thank you, Christian. We are so grateful to have our guest today, Patrick Weems, who is the executive director and founder of the Emmett Till Interpretive Center in Sumner, Mississippi. And this is a really interesting project that Patrick is managing, and he's somebody who is very connected in the South in this Mississippi community, and he's really focused on building community. He's focused on being a social entrepreneur and a philanthropy leader, and really the focus of his work, Christian and our listeners, is to really create a path towards restorative justice and social healing. And this is such a germane issue right now all around the country and certainly in many places around the world. But in this country, we've had months of unrest and challenges and concerns and protests around, social justice. And so we've really felt like it would be a great topic to talk about, just for us to be able to learn a little bit more how we can be more aware of where some of the feelings and emotions are coming from. And Patrick has really grown up in the middle of the South and where a lot of these challenges came from. And he's got really experience working with transformational change. And so he's bringing that experience to help build trust in the community, because really that healing is not going to happen unless trust is created. And I think that's really the purpose of this podcast today, is how can we create more awareness? How could we increase trust between all parties concerned in this country and places around the world? And really, there's no better topic than the Emmett Till story to talk about why this is such an important thing right now. And really the work that Patrick is doing is so important. I want to share a little bit more of his experience. He's working and co-founding a youth institute that is really about experiential learning for youth. And this is a program for the William Winter Institute for Racial Reconciliation. And as I said, this interpretive center that he's helped co-found and now executive directs is really about telling the story of Emmett Till and the tragedy that surrounds Emmett Till, to help facilitate healing in his community. And I think that's a story that can translate to the wider community here in the United States to help us. So, Patrick, did I butcher that too much? Is that, I mean, that's a little bit about what you're doing. I know there's a lot more to it than that.
No, that's perfect. It's I got my work started as a youth organizer, helping young people understand these important stories, and have been fortunate to stumble my way into being the co-founder and executive director of the Emmett Till Interpretive Center. So that's it in a nutshell. So yeah, you nailed it, Spencer.
Okay, well, thank you. You're very kind, but I like the metaphor stumbling into it. Will you talk about that? How did you stumble into this? What was it that got you interested in this project?
Yeah, so I grew up in Mississippi, and like a lot of young people who grew up in kind of a rural state, there's an impulse to get out of that state and go somewhere else, and especially Mississippi, because a lot of people say it's last and everything that's good, and it's first and everything that's bad, right? And it's got that reputation of just being a real stagnant state as far as progress goes. And so my impulse was to leave. I went to school down in New Orleans for a little while, and transferred to the University of Mississippi at the time of Katrina. And it was there at the University of Mississippi that is well known for the riots that took place when the first Black student tried to integrate in 1962, which led to multiple people dying. At the same time that the Cuban Missile Crisis was happening under Kennedy. And so it has this long legacy of racial strife. And so I went to that university. And while it had integrated, there was still not a lot of social cohesion, right? Black students were on this side of the campus, white students were on the other side, and I didn't even know where the international students hung out, right? And so I began asking questions, right? I asked, we're supposedly in this post-racial society where race doesn't matter, and yet it's obvious that it still mattered. And so
we're talking about the last decade is still that social separation.
Yeah. So, I mean, I joined the fraternity system, which is big at the University of Mississippi at Ole Miss. And, there was 0 Black students in the entire white Greek fraternity system. Right. And we had 30% African Americans on campus. None of them felt comfortable in that Greek space. So, that was one thing that kind of got us asking questions. I was able to get one Black student into my fraternity, and that started to snowball into the other Greek systems. But yeah, I mean, you're talking about 2005 and literally 100% white space and 100% Black space, and a lot of it was just what people were used to, right? They came from private schools that were segregated, and they came from public schools that were majority Black. And so oftentimes, that's what we do. But it was there that I started asking questions and started really listening deeply to students of color, Black students in particular. And they were telling me stories about being called the N-word, not being called on class the entire year. And my worldview just started expanding. And luckily there was an institute there for racial reconciliation. And it was called the William Winter Institute, named after one of our governors of Mississippi. And they worked with communities that had undergone racial trauma. And that's the best way to describe it. Places like Philadelphia, Mississippi, where 3 civil rights workers in 1964 were murdered. Mississippi burning was about that case. And so they worked with that community, began some honest conversation, some trust building that led to the first conviction in that case for 40 years, excuse me. So 40 years to the date of the murder, they finally had justice in that case. So it took 40 years.
So talk about why that's so important. I mean, it took 40 years for that to happen. I mean, because that really erodes some of the trust that we're talking about here, that racial healing that we're talking about, because it takes 4 decades for the perpetrators of those murders to be brought to justice. I mean, if I'm related to that or know about it, and I'm thinking, why is that taking so long?
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, can you imagine your loved one being brutally murdered? Everybody knows who did it. The reason that he was never convicted was because he was a preacher, and there was a hung jury several times in the 1960s because they refused to indict a preacher. I don't know what type of gospel he was preaching, right? But that was their reasoning. And so this community saw this murderer go to the same coffee shop every morning. He hung out in their downtown area and had never spent a day in jail, even though he was the mastermind, the main KKK member who orchestrated this murder of 2 white men from the north and 1 black man who lived in Mississippi. And so that talk about distrust, right? Talk about living with these legacies of injustice. That's what it was like for many in Mississippi, and still today, right? That there was never any sense of justice or doing what was right. And so it's never too late. And in order to have the healing and reconciliation that we all want, in order to have that racial harmony that we all want, they said, we first need justice. And so let's bring this guy to jail. Let's do the right thing. And then we can begin some of that healing work. And so our community saw that in Tallahatchie County, where Emmett Till was brutally murdered, kidnapped from his uncle's home, tortured in a barn, and then thrown into the Tallahatchie River, only to be found 3 days later. His murderers, and there was at least 7 people that were involved in his murder, never went to jail. His mother decided to have an open casket in Chicago. Emmett was from Chicago, but was visiting relatives in Mississippi. Her open casket ceremony in Chicago shocked the world. This happened in 1955, and photography and TV was in everybody's home at the time. Everybody had that one black and white TV. And so this story began to ripple across the nation. John Lewis, who just recently passed, talked about how Emmett Till was his George Floyd, right? That it was a thing that made him so upset, so angry, that John Lewis changed his life. And so I was able to be a part of this institute that did this type of work. And it just really set off a domino in my life that allowed me to be a part of this work. And so I came to Sumner, Mississippi, which is a town of 500, in 2007. They were offering the first apology ever to the Till family. So 50 years went by without the family even having any type of healing or closure or justice. Our community brought them back to Mississippi, offered an official apology, and began.
Patrick, sorry to interrupt. Who was it that offered that apology? I mean, you said our community. Who took that responsibility?
Yeah, so there was 2 people who kind of led the initiative. A black man named Jerome G. Little, who was the head of the county board of supervisors. So, in a rural area, it's not the mayor, it's not the city council, it's the county board of supervisors who are really the main government in our community. So he got a commission started, 18-person multiracial commission. Many of the white people on that commission owned the land, right? So we're talking about big cotton plantations, cotton farms that have been owned for generations. And so many of the white people in that commission were landowners, and the black people had grown up on their land, right? So we're not that far away from that plantation lifestyle where you have sharecropping and that sort of system. And so the difference was that the black people were now the new mayors of the town, the first black mayors, the first black board of supervisors. And so it was some tense conversations, to say the least, right? But they worked out a way of interacting and listening to each other. Not every meeting went well. There was a lot of meetings where people left angry, but they stayed at the table. They heard each other. And by the end of the process, they wrote a one-page apology that said this was a system of racism. This wasn't just 2 or 7 men that did this. It was a system of racism that allowed this to happen, from the president to the governor to the sheriff, to everybody who was complicit in allowing the murder and then the injustice to take place, because everybody knew that these men murdered Emmett Till, but they put on a sham trial anyways. And so this 18 board commission signed it. The sheriff spoke. The board of supervisors spoke. Former Governor Winter spoke. State senators came out and spoke. So it was a whole ceremony of public officials saying their remorse, saying their words of forgiveness, of asking for forgiveness from the Till family.
So what was the outcome of that apology? Because you can issue an apology and someone could very easily say, well, okay, that was 4 years too late, thanks. But it was long overdue. So what happens after this apology is issued?
Yeah. I mean, and you have to put yourself in the family's shoes, right? That every day, they would say they think about Emmett, right? It was their cousin, it was their loved one. For Mamie, it was her child, her only child, and there was never any action to do what was right. And for them, I think that it was, one of the Till family members spoke that day, a woman named Deborah Watts, and Deborah said that she had been holding her breath for 50 years. And once she heard the apology, said, I could finally exhale. And so we knew that those were just words on a piece of paper, and that they were hollow unless we backed them up with action. And so this same multiracial group of citizens who, ordinarily wouldn't be working together because our community is still very racially divided, all Black churches, all white schools, all white private schools, all Black public schools. This multiracial commission began to raise money to restore our courthouse back to the way it looked in 1955 as part of a truth and reconciliation process. The idea that we raised $4 million for the courthouse. began up to put up historical markers all across the county.
Would you repeat that, Patrick? You cut out there.
Yeah. Oh no!
Would you repeat that?
So we raised. So the apology wasn't enough. We raised $4 million to restore a courthouse. We opened up a museum to live that apology out. Programs with young people and put up historical markers to tell the truth for the first time.
How is that? You had this multi-racial commission issuing this apology, and you still have this somewhat segregated or quite segregated community. How have they responded to the courthouse refurbishments, to all these monuments and all of that? What's been the public sentiment?
So everything, right? Everything in between, right? From congratulating us for finally breaking the silence to the day of the apology, someone backed up their truck. We had put up a historical marker that finally acknowledged what took place at that courthouse. This international scene took place there. And so we put up a historical marker. Someone backed up their truck to rip it out of the ground. And they went into the courthouse and started using the N-word and were very upset and were angry that someone would even mention Emmett Till's name. And so one of our board members came down to talk to him, an older white board member whose husband was mayor of the town. And she said, Jolie, what's the matter? And he said, well, I don't know who put this up. I want to know who put this up. And she pointed to herself and she said, we did. The community, the commission that's made up of 18 community members, we put this up. And he said, well, why did y'all do this? Why are y'all trying to bring up this past? This should be gone and forgotten. We shouldn't be talking about this. And she listened, right? She just listened. And he kind of kept on down that rant, this old argument that we should just ignore all the bad stuff. Let's just ignore it, right? And maybe it'll go away. And so she listened very deeply to him. And when there was a pause in the conversation, she said, Jolie, how old is your son? And he said, I don't know. I think he's about to turn 14. And she said, well, that's the same age Emmett was. And we're not trying to force anything on anybody. We're not trying to change anybody's way of life. But we want to make sure this story is told so it never happens to anybody else's 14-year-old. So he left. He went back to his house. And he came back to her house later that day, and he carries a gun. So she was a little bit nervous about answering the door, but she opened it a crack, right? And right. And so he said, listen, I was talking to my wife tonight, and she works at a garment factory, and we think that y'all need to have a proper unveiling of that marker the day of the apology. And we'd like to donate this fabric that y'all can open this ceremony up the right way. And so we say that story because there's folks in our community who still are reluctant, who are not willing to go there. But I think our purpose is to listen deeply. And that doesn't mean we only listen to one side. It means we listen to our entire community. We create space for change. It's been much easier to call that guy a racist, and he would have stayed happily a racist. But as soon as you begin to open up the space for people to change, sometimes they surprise you.
This experience, Patrick, that you have related is just incredible, really. What are some of the key learnings that the commission and the residents of that community have learned so far that could potentially apply to other communities? Are there some universal truths, or does every community have to kind of chart its own course?
I think it's both. I think the cool thing or the amazing thing is once you take this kind of polarizing conversation from the talking heads on CNN or Fox News, and you bring it home locally, you begin to realize that you can actually have conversation, and you can have real conversation that can change and help your community. And so I think the basic principles are the same, We use some touchstones that the Winter Institute gave us as far as how to have good conversation. And those guideposts include, a broken record. Listen deeply is one of the first ones. Use I statements. Turn to wonder when someone makes you angry.
Explain what you mean by that. Turn to wonder, because I believe that's more of seeking to understand. But is that what you mean by that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's seeking to understand is turning curiosity, right? So if someone says something that they just put their foot in their mouth, and you want to just immediately pop them in the mouth, you step back and you say, "Wow, I wonder who raised them. I wonder what made them think that was the right thing to say." So again, you're creating this space for people to show up authentically. And one of the things that we found is by sharing personal experiences, telling your own story. Nobody can argue with you about your own story. I was born in Mississippi. Nobody can tell me differently, right? So being able to even create that space to have the trust that it's needed to go further in the conversation, I think that is universal. And I think it almost has to happen on a local by local basis, right? Nobody can, there's no presidential order that can be done in order to create that type of space on the local level. But then the local residents get to decide what they're going to do, right? And so I see a lot of conversations about monuments and this and that. Listen, that's up to the local community. And if they decide that something needs to stay, then that's up to them. As long as there's a democratic process and people are heard and they're able to move forward with it. And so I think those principles are universal. What the community ends up doing with those principles is different.
Wow, that's those to me. I have so many things I want to talk about with you. This is great. And first of all, what was it that caused you, Patrick, as sitting in that classroom, at Ole Miss University, to even notice that someone else was raising their hand that wasn't getting called on? Why you? Some of our listeners may be saying, but what about the color of Patrick's skin? Why is he leading this project?
That's right. So I'm a white guy from Mississippi, came from a very conservative background. And my work has just really evolved based on me understanding and listening to others. I after graduation, I worked for the Winter Institute, but I had a moment where I was really praying about where I wanted my direction to go. And I was going through discernment about going to seminary. And I was really feeling called to do something within the church. And through that process, like the last day of it, it was kind of where you decide what you want to do. And I've been working a little bit with the Emmett Till Commission and helping them kind of volunteer basis. And I just felt really called to do this work. That's the only a word I can use. I've been in conversation with one of the Till family members who lived in Mississippi. And so while majority of the Till family fled Mississippi because they were scared for their life, her side of the family stayed in Mississippi, and we'd gotten to be friends. And I asked her advice. I said, what do you think I should do? They're looking for somebody. They don't have any money, but they're looking for somebody to help found this organization and take it to the next level as a museum. And she said, go for it. And I think had it not been for her blessing, had it not been for her saying this, don't be afraid, go step into that space. I don't think I would have done it. That being said, I'm not trying to be the white knight. I'm not on my horse as a white knight trying to save everybody. I think I've got a unique position. We all do, and I want to make sure that I use it for the right reasons. So I say use my white privilege for good. People use white privilege. That's fine. It's who I am, but I want to use it for good. I want to try to create systems and communities that listen to each other, and then take responsibility for how we're going to move forward.
I think one of the things that's most important for any understanding to really be built is to have a common understanding of the terminology that's used when we have these conversations. And you just mentioned the term white privilege. So what exactly does that term mean? How are we supposed to interpret this term white privilege?
I have no idea. So, I think terms are thrown around a lot. And I think there's often a backlash to those, right? I mean, my family grew up poor Mississippi, right? My grandfather didn't have air conditioning in his home until the 1970s, right? And in Mississippi, hot as hell, right? Didn't have air conditioning until the 1970s. So I think the idea is no fault of my own. Just by being white, I've heard certain things that have privileged me, and I think it's really difficult, right? And I hate to even use that word because I think it can shut people down immediately. Like my father, if I told him he had white privilege, he would kick me out of the house, right? So I'm not quick to use those terms because I think it's better, again, to build relationships, to hear stories, and that way you can move forward. I can give you lots of different stats and statistics about how, a white person in Mississippi, a white male without a high school diploma makes the same amount of money as a black female with a college degree. So a black female with a college degree and a white man without a high school degree make the same amount of money in Mississippi. I can tell you that
just talked to,
and that doesn't mean as much. I mean, some people, it still goes over their head. And so, but there are some, there's some, you can look at those pieces and know that's true. Right?
Well, I think you've given a couple of examples. I mean, this is just an interpretation that I would have of that. And for example, in the classroom, you raised your hand and got called on. And in a way, that's a form of privilege, right? Being recognized. When you speak, maybe there are more people that listen, right? I mean, I think one of the reasons why it's important that we have this conversation, and I mean, people of, white race. I mean, we have to be able to have this discussion and understand what's going on, and possibly people are going to hear you, maybe, and that's a privilege that otherwise wouldn't. The story you told about the monument, that guy going in, it struck me that it was the county commissioner that was white that was able to be heard by that, even just listening, to be able to reach that individual. But to me, that touched. I mean, that story made me very emotional. But that person's attitude changed, and I think that's the importance of us having this conversation today, Patrick. You have the ability, with I would say that type of privilege, to maybe have people hear this story that otherwise might not.
That's it, Spencer. That's it. 100%. That's it. I mean, you nailed it. I think it's how do you use your role, your position in life? How do you use it for good? And I think it's much easier to be silent on some of these issues. It's easier to kind of fade into the background. That's someone else's problem. This is someone else's, but how do you use your position in life? And not that you're the hero of the story that you're going to conquer and you're going to, no, that you use it for the good of all and create that space. And so one of the things I did when just being in my position is making sure that we were listening to Black voices, right? The Till story, for years, it's centered around white voices. So the white woman At the center of this was a woman named Carolyn Bryant. And so Carolyn Bryant said in 1955 that Emmett jumped over the counter, grabbed her, and said, have you ever been with a black man before? Well, we knew that was a lie because his cousins were there in 1955 sitting on the porch, and they didn't hear any commotion inside. Nobody interviewed the black cousins until 1985. They took her and they took her story and they said, that's the truth. The same goes with the murderers. The murderers confessed to the murder in 1956 and told Look magazine that they murdered Emmett Till. Everybody believed their version of the story, even though a black sharecropper was there in 1955 and had seen what really took place. 18-year-old black man saw what took place, and people refused to listen to his story. And so one of the things that we're trying to do is not rewrite history, but to listen to the black voices that authentically were there and who have the knowledge and the truth. And so lifting those and prioritizing.
So Patrick, sorry to interrupt, but this is really, I think, why this is relevant on a podcast that's about team performance, because we need each other in the community. I want to talk to you a little bit about that. We need each other in the workplace. We need different voices and different perspectives in order to be strong. If we just have one perspective or one voice, we will make mistakes. Business leaders will make choices that are not as rich or considered if they had listened to more voices. And this is the opportunity we have as a country. We are one of the greatest countries in the world because of our diversity. We have people that have come from all over the world we've called it the melting pot. Like, I'm first generation American. My parents, mother Canadian, father German. I know, Patrick, you have different races in your background, Polynesian and all kinds of stuff. That's what makes this country great, is the different heritages that have come together to this land. But we need to listen to each other because our different perspectives make us stronger, not weaker.
That's it. And I think that goes, we're all different, right? And whether we have the same racial identity or backgrounds, we all have different gifts that we've been blessed with. And so I think it's really understanding one, that we are different. We do see the world in a different way, and trying to cultivate teams that have them as much diversity as possible, and using that as the best strength. And I think that's exactly right. Our country, we talk about in the South, it's a gumbo, right? It's got everything in it, and that's what makes a gumbo so delicious, is that it stews in there. It comes out exactly the way you want it. And so we lift that up on our team. We made sure to hire the first museum director is African American. He's from the community. And so, just making sure that we're intentional about having diversity throughout our team and our program.
One thing, Patrick, that you mentioned when we had a conversation last week was that reconciliation is not an event. It's a process, and it can take a while. How can we have patience as we go through this progression?
Yeah, I think that's right. And I hate it. Right. Because I wish there was, a button we could push and this is all over. Right. And we're living in the utopia that we all want. I think often in American society, we have a microwave solution. Right. We want the 3-minute, put it in for 3 minutes, hit enter, and it's done. And the tragic thing or the reality is it doesn't happen that quickly. The good thing is that change has happened. I talked to Reverend Wheeler Parker, who's was Emmett Till's cousin who came down on the train with Emmett. So he was 16 years old and Emmett was 14. He was in the bedroom next door when Emmett got kidnapped. And he had to come back to Chicago with the casket, right? This casket came to Chicago and he did too. And so Wheeler talks a lot about if you didn't live 1955 Mississippi, you'll never understand it. It was that bad. He talks about, one eyeball, a reckless eyeball could get you killed. Meaning if you're a black man walking down the street and you look the wrong way at a white woman, you could be killed. And he lived it, right? We don't live in 1955 Mississippi anymore. Right. We do have protections. We do have a legal system. We do have more accountability. And so I think it's good for us to say, what's happening now in our society is not good, right? That you can be killed for jogging, right? That is not an okay scenario, no matter the society, but it's better. There's moral outrage. There's voices, there's lawyers, there's people dedicated to this cause and this work. And so
there are people that are able to express themselves. One of the things we talked about is maybe taking a knee, and there are many people listening to this that really causes frustration because they see how much privilege everybody has. And it's kind of like, well, can't we just move past this? It's kind of like the guy at the courthouse, right? Saying, let's just forget about all of it. And I think in many ways I'm guilty of that. Just, you see athletes that are privileged in terms of their ability to earn, and many people have the opportunity for education today. And so some white people are frustrated and saying, hey, I'm not going to watch, sports anymore because they just don't get it. What do you say to that? And I know that could be controversial, but I mean, how do you respond to that?
Yeah, I wish I made as much money as some of the athletes do. Man, that would be great, right? I think the beauty is that exactly right, that we do live in a democracy. Right. We don't live in China where if you protest and you say the wrong thing, you can, we live in a democracy where your voice matters. And I commend the NFL and these other national sports leagues for allowing these voices to be heard. And I think the reality is that those voices have been there all along. People have been trying to raise up and say, hey, we're not in the more perfect union. We can still get better. And I would say absolutely that, to back up, to use that same perspective. I wonder why that person is doing that. That can't be easy for them, to potentially lose audiences, to lose money, to lose endorsements,
sponsorships, maybe, right.
I wonder why they're going out of their way to take that stand. And that's the second thing I'd say is to read, right? Or read Black literature. Natasha Trethewey was the former U.S. Poet Laureate of the United States. She's written her own memoir. Read Kiese Layman, who is a writer from Mississippi. These are all Black authors. Read some Black authors so that you can start to understand what it's like to be Black in America. And I know that's a tough task, right? We can barely turn on Netflix, but expose yourself to communities outside of your own little circle.
I think that's a fabulous idea. And could you spell the names of those authors, please?
Yeah, so Natasha Trethewey is the first one. So Natasha Trethewey, Trethway, Way, and then Kiese Layman is K. And I might be. I apologize, Mr. Layman, if I messed it up. Kiese is Kiesse, and then Layman is Laymon. Kiese Layman. at least how I've been told to pronounce it. He's going to be speaking at an anniversary event August 28th, which is Emmett Till's 65th anniversary of his murder. And so KSA is going to be reading from his own memoir about his experience as a young Black man in Mississippi and what that was like.
Patrick, what's the end game? We've used these terms, racial healing. We've talked about reconciliation. I come from an accounting background, so reconciliation means bringing into balance the debits and the credits, or my assets equal my liabilities plus owner's equity. So when it comes to the work specifically that you're doing, and then the broader effort that is now going on throughout this nation, in your view, what's the end game?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I don't have that answer, right? Especially as a white man, I don't have that answer, right? Because I think it's a conversation, it's a process that gets us there. I think when we issued that apology, that was just the first step. And I think in many communities in the United States, we haven't even taken that first step, right? And so how do we know where we're going unless we're acknowledging where we've been? And so I think the first needed work is to set the record straight, right? And so many people have this history. Abraham Lincoln stood up, all the slaves were free, Rosa Parks sat down, and we were all able to vote, right? And I think once you start to pull back some of the true realities that, yeah, Abraham Lincoln freed the slaves, but they were then forced into indentured servitude in the Deep South for the next 60 years, right? More, right? So from 1890 to 1964, we lived under Jim Crow, which was, just another name for slavery. And in many cases, it was worse because you would be housed in penitentiaries and leased out. And in the coal mines in Alabama, in northern Alabama, the steel places, your life expectancy was about 5 to 8 years. So these kind of hidden histories about lynchings, about how bad it's been in our country, I think the first step is acknowledging it, and then it's getting to a place where we say we need each other. Because if we're going to take responsibility for our past, it's got to be done in a way that's inclusive of everyone, and that's including white people as well, right? And we have to be a part of that process. We can't say we're taking our ball and we're going home. We have to say what is the hard work of creating a community and society that we all want to live on. And again, I think it's easier in some ways to do that on the local level. Once we get to the national, it becomes more polarizing. But I do believe there is a way forward. And hell, if Mississippi can do it, right, I think we all can do it.
So what about Ireland and South Africa and Tutsis and Hutus, right? And I mean, we can all do it, can't we? I mean, there's actually people around the world that are watching us right now to see how we handle this moment in time in history. That's
100% it. That's 100%. We've learned from the South African model of truth and reconciliation. Everybody thought immediately that country would break out in civil war, like had happened in so many African countries. Northern Ireland, they never thought that violence would stop. And it's still not over, right? There's still this ongoing kind of nurturing of civil society, of ways that we engage with each other. But the world is watching. And they're saying, can democracies, multiracial democracies survive, right? Can that work happen? And I think absolutely. I think it makes our country stronger. It makes us a better place to live. It allows us to bring in new people into this country that can help us innovate. But it's not inevitable, right? It takes hard work and nurturing to have such a beautiful and diverse country.
And that's the process that you're talking about. And, I'm so grateful that you came on and so impressed with really your experience and your perspective. I'm also grateful to Joseph Olszewski and Judith Bonnell for really bringing us to the attention that you were out there and that this project existed and that they care enough. I mean, here's some people that we met in Georgetown in the DC area, and they just think the world of what you're doing, and that this is a story that gets to get out and gets to be heard. And so grateful to them and their family for introducing us.
No doubt. Joseph and his family are great folks, and are helping us think about education and supporting us for their family foundation. So they're great people.
So
Wonderful.
Patrick, if people want to learn more about the work that you're doing there with the Emmett Till Interpretive Center or the other initiatives that you have going on, or they would just want to have a conversation with you and gain greater understanding, what's the best way for them to connect with you and connect with the work that you're doing?
Yeah, so I'd say our website, emmett-till.org, and that's EMMETT-Till.org. And then just look us up on social media. We're on Twitter and Facebook. And like I said, August 28th, we'll be having some anniversary events and thinking about these hard questions. So thinking about justice, thinking about healing, thinking about memorialization. What does that mean? And what does it mean in the context of the moment we're living in right now?
And Spencer, what's the best way for people to get a hold of you?
Thank you, Christian. Spencer at altiumleadership.com. That's ALTIUM leadership.com. It's my email, or go to altiumleadership.com, our website.
All right, excellent. And people can reach me at cnapier@gp4.com. That's cnapier@gpfour.com, or go to the website gp4.com. Patrick, Spencer, thank you so much. Really enjoyable, important conversation. And Patrick, appreciate your time very much.
Yeah, thank you guys. Thank you all for your questions and your open hearts and listening. Thank you all.